Hi guys, welcome back to Calling Them Out. I am your hostess, Nefreteri. Yes, I have been missing in action, but I will explain that towards the end because it wraps in perfectly with this episode, which is about solitude versus isolation. Isolation has become a serious buzzword. We thought that it would leave after COVID-19. It has not. It is now bigger and better and stronger than ever, and it's being wrapped up into new language. And this being a Christian podcast, I'm going to talk about the cultural influences of like what's going on, weaving in some science and also some spirituality. And then I will tell you what the Bible has to say about all of this towards the end, and what this means for like believers in Christianity as opposed to somebody who is a non-believer. But to start it all off, as I like to start all of my episodes, with some definitions. But I looked up the definition of isolation and solitude. They're not too meaty of definitions, but we'll start there. Isolating is having the effect of making a person feel or be alone or apart from others. So it has a feeling. Solitude is simply the state of being alone. So, as I said, those aren't beefy enough, but they have definitive meanings. Solitude is a legitimate, practice that people have been doing for thousands of years. And literally, the difference between the two is something super important. It's the motive behind why you're doing it. So what we're seeing right now in society is a lot of people are, you've most likely heard people say this, they're protecting their inner peace. And that is, in my opinion, under the guise of self-care. So they're isolating under the guise of self-care and self-love. Now, many people will deny this. They'll say that, no, this is what I do to love me and my peace. And the truth of the matter is, not many people are just going to come right out and tell you that they're super weak and that they're struggling. Okay, that's not how people are. So what I have to say is, let's just go back to how this all began. And this all began during COVID-19 because people weren't really like this. And this whole isolation, this whole self-isolating, protecting your inner peace is a reaction. It's not even my opinion. It is a reaction that people are doing. And when you react, there has to be a cause and effect, right? So let's just bring it back to where it all started. COVID-19, we were forced into isolation, right? And everybody complained, but it was like legitimate, it was isolation. It was a lockdown, right? So you couldn't go to stores. A lot of people couldn't see their friends. Like, you were legitimately, depending on where you lived, some people really barely went outside. So that was pretty close to like solitary confinement in prison. And that is a torture. I looked up, I think it's from the UN or the World Health Organization. I think you can have max 15 or 19 days in solitary confinement before it's considered inhumane. So humans, we are actually like herd community relational animals, if you wish. We are relational beings. We are made to be around other people. We are not made to be alone. Whether you believe in evolution or creation, it doesn't matter. Humans are community-based beings, and you can see it clear as day in society. We live in families. And so humans can't be by themselves. And there's all sorts of scientific research that talks about what happens when a person is all by themselves. You can look it up. Crazy things start to happen. When people emerged from COVID, people became super duper uncivil. And it was known. People were saying this everywhere. People were unkind. They were like, yo, did people forget how to live with other human beings? People were just nasty to one another when we emerged. And during COVID, something was kind of infused into our society, and it worked perfectly when we were in isolation. And it was self-care. Self-care blew up. Everybody was like foot masking, face masking, massaging, like everybody was doing everything in the world for their self-care, and it went perfectly with isolation. So we emerged and self-care didn't go anywhere. And all the self-help books are all about self-love, self-care, you do you, you take care of you. And I like to use the word selfish. I believe that that's what was being pushed on us, selfishness. And people got very obsessed with this. And we're in denial about the words that we hear in society, but it's conditioning. When you hear one thing over and over and over, it kind of infiltrates into who you are as a person. And so right now we're in a selfishness movement. Some people are calling it self-love, but really it's selfishness. And so we do have a whole group of people who are unkind. And so the reaction to this was people wanting to put up boundaries, and boundaries, they are mistaken as to what they are. They seem to think that they are walls, and they are not. Boundaries should be gates. Boundaries are there for protection, but it should have a wonderful gate that you can allow good in and out, and you know, that's what a boundary is. But what people want to do is they want to like go to work, get their dose of people and be like, I'm out, like peace out, like I can't deal with this anymore. And then they go back home and they say, I'm protecting myself and I'm protecting my inner peace. And so my theory is that because of COVID, I think people said to themselves, well, we isolated before and we lived. So what's it? Let me just isolate now. And now I get to go out every now and then. I can go to restaurants, I can eat out, right? And I get my small dose of people, and then I get to go back home. That's my theory. That's what I think is happening right now. People, we survived isolation, and you were like, hey, that wasn't so bad, and we have some freedom. I'll just stay at home. So something that we're seeing right now, and it's something that I want you to start paying attention to if you haven't been, we are getting hit with two different types of vocabulary at the same time, and they're coming from different sources. So one of them is therapy speak, and the other is spiritual speak. And therapy is supposed to be science-based, and spirituality is spiritual-based. And they are being fused in a very fascinating way. And so we have therapy speak is like, you know, narcissism, gaslighting, triggers, stuff like that. And then spirituality, which I want to say is more coming from the New Age movement, is and not just New Age, also like Eastern spirituality practices, so like meditation, yoga, positive affirmations, manifesting, stuff like that. And what I think is so fascinating is that science has always been separated from anything spiritual, because science has to deal with like tangible facts, things that we can actually see and touch. It doesn't matter if it's with a microscope or a telescope, it's something tangible. And they are weaving in all sorts of spiritual practices. So I am going to touch on this a little bit more later, but it's just something that I want you to start keeping your eyes open with, because self-love is being used as both a scientific and a spiritual practice at the same time. And that brings us to solitude. Solitude has been a spiritual practice for thousands of years, and it's been practiced heavily by gurus, spiritual leaders, monks, prophets, Jesus, and they all have different motivations. Being alone has benefits beyond spirituality, so we're going to talk about that, and we're actually going to talk about it momentarily. But what I need to identify is like the kind of the difference between isolation and solitude. Solitude by nature is preparatory. It's purposeful. So it's a practice. Like if you are in solitude, yes, it is the state of being alone, but you actually choose to be alone. Not for protection. You choose to be alone for a purpose, and it's usually, as I said, it's growth-based or preparatory. Isolation is not that. As I said, that you have this feeling of being lonely, of being alone. Solitude is not really about that. So, as I said, it is practiced by spiritual leaders, but it's also practiced by some other people. Anybody who wants to get work done, literally. So it's practiced by artists, authors. If you have a job to do, what do? You pull away and you do it by yourself. If you're going to take a test and you need to study, you pull away from other people, you go into a state of being alone and you study. So solitude has a purpose, but you're not pulling away so you can sit there and wallow in your misery. It's not about watching TV. So solitude is not usually about consumption unless it's consumption for growth purposes. So some people are pulling away and they're sitting on social media, they're watching a lot of TV, they're gaming, they're doing a lot of mindless things. That is not purposeful solitude. Yes, you are alone. That is more isolation. Solitude would be if somebody actually, if they pulled away and they were making a video game, if they were making a painting, if they were filming something, sitting in their room making a video. All of these things you have to do by yourself. It's purposeful. Self-isolating is a protective coping mechanism. You get it from the language. When you hear somebody say they are protecting their inner peace, they are literally putting up a wall of defense. There is something that they are reacting to that they wish to either keep something inside, right? They're trying to keep their inner peace inside of them. They're trying to keep the negative energy and everything else outside. It is protective. It is a coping mechanism. So you could go into solitude to do spiritual things in nature, or as I said, you can do it to do work. Somebody think that I think is really funny. There was an author, his name was Victor Hugo. He wrote Les Miserables. He was so behind on his deadline that he gave his assistant his clothing and he locked himself in a room with nothing but a shawl so that he could sit there and have absolutely no distractions. He busted out his book in 6 months. He did focused work. This is something that you only kind of get in a state of solitude. It's something called the state of flow. And so you sit there and you get so focused in what you're doing that you actually aren't sitting there thinking. You're not thinking about the fact that you're single, you don't have any friends. You are so focused and absorbed that you actually end up in like a sense of fulfillment. You actually feel quite happy because you are achieving so much work. So that is what makes solitude different from isolation, because it's purposeful, right? Your mind isn't just blank or wandering or being empty-headed. Now, if that's what most people were doing, that would be fine. But solitude, as I said, is not protective in nature. It is a growth process. It's a growth practice, It's a growth practice. But the people who are talking about protecting their inner peace, they're not happy. And that's what they're in denial about. They're talking about protecting inner peace, but they're not. And it's also, and I know this is going to trigger people because I said it online and it triggered people. It's a form of weakness. So not only are you protecting, it's a fear mechanism. So you're afraid of being hurt, which I totally get because people are being meaner. So you don't know how to really respond to this. And so you're just like, you know what? People are being so bad. I don't want to engage. Well, that increases loneliness. Loneliness, as I briefly touched on, I said we're relational beings. There's all kinds of bad things that happen when humans are not around other humans. And neuroscience is, it's not really a new branch, but we're hearing a lot about it. And the reason we are hearing about it, as I mentioned before, is there's this weird branching of science and spirituality. And they're doing it under the brain, but kind of like the mind. And we know that the mind and the brain are separate, but we're getting this weird fusion that's going on. It's intentional. It's intentional. And that's why I said I want you to start really paying attention to it, because with like the whole separation of church and state and religious and science were never supposed to work. But somehow lately, spirituality and science are like somehow fusing. I see what's going on, but I want you to also start looking for it. So I was on social media and I said that I learned that calling people weak triggers them. Well, I am going to read to you the post that I commented on. It is from the neuroscientist Andrew Huberman. I'm going to read it to you because he talks about the negatives of loneliness and this whole isolation that we're doing. So I'm just going to read it. He said that there is a molecule that prolonged social isolation triggers, and it's called tachykinin, and it acts as an internal punishment signal. So when tachykinin levels rise, it can lead to increased feelings of fear, paranoia, irritability, and even a weakened immune system. In essence, your brain and body are telling you you need connection. He says that isolation doesn't just affect mental health, it impacts our biology. Prioritize quality time with the people you trust and activities that bring joy. It's not just good for the soul, it's essential for the brain and body. Did you just hear a neuroscientist talk about the soul? Where do we get a soul if people are believing in evolution? A neuroscientist is not supposed to be talking about something that doesn't have anything tangible. Where does the soul hang out in the body? See, that's the kind of stuff that I want you to start thinking about. We're fusing spirituality and science these days. So pretty much he just acknowledged that we are spiritual beings. So on that post, a guy said that he disagreed with this neuroscientist. He said, I have so much peace, I disagree. So this is what I wrote back to him. And I wasn't trying to start a war. I was just writing what I fervently believe. And I don't think it's an opinion. This is what I think from my biblical worldview. I said, people who protect their peace from others don't have true peace. It's also a sign of weakness. If a person can engage with others and share their peace and joy with them, that is a powerful person. And man, people were not happy. But people, I was reading through these comments and I was looking at all the people who disagreed with this guy. This guy is a scientist, and I thought that people were just obsessed with science. They needed the scientific studies for absolutely everything. And people were in there and they were like, oh, I've been isolated so long, I don't even miss people, I completely disagree with you. I've never had so much peace in my life, I'm not even fighting with anybody. They were talking about simply their life experience, their opinion, no science. You know what that's called? It's called anecdotal evidence. It means to them that they don't care if there's science that tells them that they need to go out and befriend other people, because they've gotten so comfortable with being alone. What is happening in the world is people are actually settling for just getting by protecting their inner peace. Instead of saying, I would like to have a really great relationship, they're like, you know what? I'm totally fine with being alone and I'm going to be okay with this. When science has proven, and not even just science, we've seen it. Everybody wants to be in love. And you've seen people and they're so happy, or like if, maybe they're not so happy, but the feelings of love that floods over people. People would love to have that, but they look at it kind of like this ideal that they can't have. And so they're like, you know what? I'm just fine being alone. I'm peaceful the way that I am. And they're basing it strictly off their experience, not science anymore. In every lie, there is truth. And there's tons of truth going on here. Tons. But the problem is, people, as I said, they're in denial because human beings need connection. That neuroscientist said it. Everybody knows this. We all know that we need connection. We all know that we would love to have great friends, great relationships, great marriages. We know this. People love love and we want to be loved. But what's the major problem? We don't know how to live with each other anymore. That's the issue. And the problem happened because selfishness is being pushed at us under the guise of self-love and self-care, and you taking care of you, and it's you first and then other people second. So when you get hit with this all day, then you start putting yourself first, and then you start speaking to people differently, not so nice. And because of this, I believe what's happened is we've all gone into like self-preservation mode. And we just don't know how to engage with other people. So now I wanna move into actually what goes on when we're isolating or when we're in solitude, if you wish, and some dangerous practices. So if you're a Christian or a spiritual person, you need to acknowledge good and evil spiritual forces. You need to. And so, as I said, solitude is a spiritual practice. It always has been. And many people went into solitude for enlightenment. So non-Christians like Hindus, Buddhists, New Agers, they'll go into solitude for like deep contemplation, meditation, and spiritual enlightenment. And if you know anything about those faiths, they don't actually believe in like God and like God the creator. So they're trying to reach this higher level of consciousness, and that's what spiritual enlightenment is to them. Christianity is the only faith alone religion that it's all about being in communion with God to get help from God. So I want to speak specifically to the New Age because maybe if you didn't know, maybe you're not familiar with that term, but you're probably most definitely familiar with the practices that people are using. Maybe you don't know that it's under the term New Age spirituality, but those practices are becoming very prevalent in America right now, and the New Age pulls in stuff from really anything and everything. It's kind of like an amalgamation of practices from all sorts of different belief systems, science. I would say predominantly Eastern practices, and that's what you're seeing going on right now in America with like yoga, crystals, astrology, and then meditation is what I want to focus on because that's one of the things that people do in solitude, and they tell you to do it. They're like, because meditation by nature is something that you do alone, or you do it at least in silence. So there is such a thing as group solitude. That's where you'll go to like a retreat, or when you go to like temples and monasteries, they are with other people, but they are in silence. So you can meditate. Now, Eastern meditation is different from biblical meditation. It's the same exact word, different practice, but it's something that you do in silence. It's something that you do alone. So I tried Eastern meditation. Now, this is just my personal opinion, and there are some scientists and there are some people now, intelligent people who are agreeing with me. I thought it was stupid. Okay. Personally, as I said, this is personal. I tried it, and the reason I thought it was dumb was because I was thinking, and they say this is what I was reading. I had my apps, and it was like, clear your mind. Yes, thoughts will come up into your mind. Acknowledge the thought and sweep it away. And then another thought will come into your mind, and then just acknowledge it and sweep it away and focus on your breathing. And I'm listening to this, and I said, this is why I thought it was dumb. I said, this to me seems kind of like a waste of time. I said, I'm a thinker. Why can't I just think about something more important and maybe like chew on that? I was like, instead of me trying to fight this clearing of my mind that I'm not succeeding at. And so I think it's funny because biblical meditation is the exact opposite of Eastern meditation. So in the Bible, it will tell you to meditate on these things, meditate on the book of the law, on these words. In the Bible, we are told to meditate on God's word. So you're actually meditating on something, on a piece of scripture, on the truth, and then you're sitting there mulling it over in your mind. We are told to fill our minds, not empty them. We are told in Philippians 4:8 to meditate on things that are true, pure, noble, lovely, right? Meditate on these things. That's the exact opposite of Eastern meditation. And so when you empty your mind, you're also opening your mind. And that's why I started this with, you have to believe in evil and good spiritual forces, because that's what this whole meditation thing is about. This is why some people are legitimately having their spiritual experiences. Now, some of them feel like they're positive ones. A lot of people, especially in the New Age, they think that they are meeting angels. They do believe this. But in the Bible, angels and demons are mentioned. And I know that there are people who are in the New Age and they read books about angels. My question is, like, who wrote them though? And I know that all of them are just experience-based people. They're just talking about experiences of themselves. In the Bible though, it says that the devil masquerades as an angel of light. And it's in 2 Corinthians 11:14 through 15. I'll just read it to you. It says, "And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is of no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds." So if you're meditating and you don't have a strong grasp of truth, you will be easily deceived. You will not know what spiritual forces you're dealing with. Just to keep moving along, there's another practice that is popping up that people are being told to do in solitude, and it's called shadow work. It is a practice, it's a concept by Carl Jung, the psychologist, who it's all about acknowledging your self, your darker self and your dark behaviors. And it's about like your ego and your super ego in psychology. It's about confronting your traumas, bringing them to light so that you can better yourself. And so on the surface, it sounds great. It almost sounds like it could be biblical. It does, except for the fact that Carl Jung didn't believe in God, and he was on like a religious quest to like fuse faith and psychology and see how they could coexist. But he didn't actually land on a faith. So shadow work is actually self-work. It's more like self-actualization from like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's about you, it's very self-focused, and the problem with shadow work, and it's really kind of a huge problem, is that one, it's not rooted in any kind of truth, it's just like your truth. So you dig up all these things and then it's like whatever you think will work for you is kind of what you roll with, your truth. Another massive problem is that you're digging up trauma, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with that kind of stuff. And you're bringing it all to light. And what can happen for many, many people is you can end up getting lost, like in the dark. And without having like the Bible as a light and as a guide for you, and you know, Jesus, the hope of Jesus and salvation through grace, you could end up falling into very, very deep despair and deep guilt by digging up your traumas and not being able to work with them. It's very, very dangerous stuff to do without the Bible and without God leading you. So self-examination is fine if you have the Bible, if you have the truth to work on those character traits. So now I know some of you don't believe in the Bible as an authority. You maybe just think it's another spiritual book, a wisdom book. Or maybe you are like, yeah, I mean, sometimes there's some good stuff in it and I pull it out. Well, the Bible doesn't talk about itself as just a wisdom book. It's actually flat out calls itself the truth. And that's really, really important for the Christian faith. It says it's the truth, and we believe it's the truth because Jesus also said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And it's important because I know a lot of people, they go into solitude and they read spiritual books. And you need to ask yourself what you're reading. So some of you will be like reading The Secret. And I should have looked up who the author is, but I'm glad that I don't know, because I know a lot of people don't know who the author is of The Secret, but yet you're reading it like it's this book that you can just, run with as super credible. People are in solitude and they're using tarot cards and then going onto Google and asking, what does the judgment or what does the justice card mean? Like, where is the credibility for the things that you're looking up? And so for you to be in solitude or isolating yourself and doing this kind of work alone, these spiritual practices, you are opening yourself up to a dark world. That's what you're doing. And the last thing I'll say that people are doing as well, as I said, solitude should not be for consumption, but people are isolating and they're consuming TV. They're playing video games that are super duper violent, and they think it doesn't affect them. They're watching TV shows with broken families and glorifying broken families, cheating triangles and rectangles, all sorts of relationships that are completely not only unethical, I mean, they're just heart-wrenching. And some people are just sitting there and they're watching porn and OnlyFans, and you're putting all of this, you're consuming all of this stuff. What you're doing is you're feeding your mind in isolation. So you can have bad spiritual practices and then you can have bad consumption practices in your isolation. None of that is practicing solitude. Solitude, as I said, is growth-based, preparatory-based. And that's why we are going to go look at the Bible. We're going to look at the Christian perspective. What does the Bible have to say about this? And we're gonna use Jesus, because Jesus is really phenomenal. In his infinite wisdom, he knew that it's not just about telling us about solitude, it's about showing us. His whole life is an example, because humans do best when we see somebody else live it. And so we're just going to bang out right from the beginning what human beings are. In the beginning, Genesis 3:18, God creates human beings and he says it's not good for man to be alone. Now, I like to joke about this and I like to be like, oh, well, man, it's not good for man to be alone, but a woman is fine. Not really. God looked at his people, his humans, and he said, no, I know that I am enough, but I want my humans to have other humans to have with them. And so it says in Genesis 2:20, and Adam was like, there was not found another one, a helper comparable to him. And so God made him Eve. And so marriage is definitely the highest human connection that we can have on this planet, outside of God. But we enter into the New Testament, Jesus comes and he shows us fellowship. And he shows us fellowship by getting 12 disciples. Jesus could have done his ministry all by himself. And had he done his ministry all alone, then we would all say, oh, well, then I guess it's good to be alone. But Jesus did not. He got himself 12 disciples that were, some of them super unruly, some betrayed him, some were just straight up riffraff, I think he has like 4 sailors with him. You think they had foul mouths like sailors? Yeah, he got himself some regular people, run-of-the-mill people, to be his disciples. And that is who he took with him on his ministry. And so he has 12 disciples, as I said, and then 3 of them are a part of his inner circle. And I think that's a really good example of just friendships or fellowship in general. You're not going to be BFFs with every single person that you know, right? You can have your 3 best friends if 3 best friends is really great nowadays. And then, have a larger circle. But Jesus does things a wonderful way as well. So he trains them up And then if you've read the Bible, he sends them out on their first mission, and he sends them out 2 by 2. He does not send them out alone. Why? Because it's nicer. It's not just nicer, you're stronger when you have a partner to go out and do anything with. And so this is Jesus setting up this great example for us. And so I want to just we're going to touch on him, and then I'm quickly going to mention like Paul and the church, because Jesus is really perfect. When he comes out, when you first meet him as an adult, not as a baby, as an adult, he gets baptized, and then he goes into solitude immediately. It says in Matthew 4, 1-2, it says, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry." So his solitude was for a reason. During that 40 days and 40 nights, he's by himself. He's in solitude. And he has physical and spiritual trials while he's out there. I'm not going to go into the whole temptations of Jesus Christ, but after it, that's Matthew 4, 1-2. Matthew 4, 11, he's done with the temptations. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him. So that fasting was like that solitude was like full circle. As I said, physical, spiritual trials. Then he has angels come and minister to him. It was preparatory in nature, what Jesus just did. And that was the longest form of solitude you see in Jesus's ministry. And it's right before he starts his ministry. So he goes and he gets baptized. He goes through these trials. He is now ready to go out and get disciples. And that's the next thing he does. He goes and he gets his 12 disciples. So we have a perfect example of solitude as preparation and for growth. Next, we're going to skip most of his life because it's a lot. But one of the most important things that any Christian should be doing in solitude is praying. And Jesus has this beautiful, beautiful life of prayer. And the one gospel that you can really read about Jesus's prayer life is the book of Luke. So when you're reading through it, if you read through Luke, just really start paying attention to before Jesus goes to talk to people or like give a sermon or afterwards. You will notice that Jesus wakes up, he goes off to a quiet place and he goes off in prayer, or after he's with a group of people, he pulls away to rest and to pray. And he does this all the time. And as I said, it's mentioned more so in the book of Luke. So you're always seeing Jesus praying in the book of Luke so regularly that we're introduced to the Lord's Prayer in Luke 11. And I just want to read how he gets into it because it's perfect. It says, "Now Jesus was praying in a certain place. And when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, 'Lord, teach us how to pray.'" So they already knew he was off in a certain place. They know this is like a regular practice for him. So he no longer does these extended forms of solitude in his 3-year ministry, but he does do daily solitude. Every single morning, he goes off to a quiet place. You may have heard some Christians call it their closet, to pray with the Lord. So every single person, everybody who is a believer, they need to start their day. We need to start our days in prayer with God. We need to start our day alone with him. So it doesn't matter if you have a spouse, if you have kids, you want to do a Bible study with them, perfectly fine. Fantastic. Pray with them. But you need to do it alone as well. It's your time to talk to God, to set your day in the right direction. And that might be the solitude enough that you need. That's daily solitude, not extended anymore. After that, the longest time we see Jesus in any kind of solitude, if you wish, is one of the greatest moments in Jesus's life. And it is in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before he is crucified. This is another example of, yet again, the preparatory work of being in solitude. So he is about to be betrayed, and he goes to this garden with Peter, James, and John. And I'm going to read it to you because we're going to talk about quite a few things that is in it. So this is Luke 22, And I'm going to read 40 through 46 to you. And it says, when he came to this place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw. And he knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Then he said to them, why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation. There was so much in there. He is praying to his Father to give him strength. Jesus is praying because he knows that he has to go die on the cross for our sins. And so he knows mentally, knowing that he is innocent, but he had to die the cruel death of crucifixion by the Romans, which many people knew exactly what that entailed. And so what did he do? He went to pray to his Father to get some strength. And look at what it said. It said God sends him an angel to strengthen him. That's what he needed to prepare to get up and then say, thy will be done. Jesus was human and God at the same time. He was in a human body. He knew it was going to hurt. It was going to more than hurt. And that level of suffering, he needed strength. He went into solitude. But what I think is also fascinating is what he said to his disciples. And it was, rise and pray lest you enter into temptation. So Judas had already just betrayed Jesus. And he's coming into the garden with, to kiss Jesus on the cheek. So Jesus is telling them, you got to stay, you got to get your eyes open. You got to be vigilant. So the same kind of thing doesn't happen to you. And Jesus dies on the cross, he's resurrected, and he leaves his disciples left to form the church. And so that right there, the church, this concept alone makes self-isolating for the believer just all around wrong. Because Jesus's church involves people, flawed people. Hypocrites are in the church. Yes, they are. And you know what? Many people, they want to bow out of the church because of hypocrites. I challenge that. I do. If you are a great Christian and you are filled with the Spirit, instead of taking the Spirit with you and leaving the church, how about you go back to the church and you build it up the way Jesus asked you to? How about you bring the Spirit with you and you start a ministry of your own in the church? Because I said this to a friend. I said, where are the people that are seekers of the Lord? They're either on the internet or they're like, oh, well, I heard about a church. And so they're there. There are some people who want to grow. And if all the strong Christians leave the church because the church is filled with hypocrites, then who will these new believers or the ones who are seekers, where will they go? Who will they go to? Who will strengthen them? Who will make them into better disciples? So I challenge you, if you left the church because you said that it's full of hypocrites or you don't like different things that are going on, find a better church, find one that is a little bit more doctrinally sound, and you bring the Spirit that lives inside of you back to the church. As I said, I know some of you'll be like, look, there's no good churches in my area. I suffered this. I did. And you want to know what I did? I drove an hour both ways to go to a church. And it's becoming tougher and tougher. Churches are closing and we're building up more mega churches. I get it, and it's problematic, but some of you drive an hour just to get to work, to and fro. So do the same thing on Sunday, hang out, fellowship with more people, go to lunch, brunch with them, really build some Christian friends, but you got to get back into one, because there are devastating things that happens to a believer worse than a non-believer when they isolate. And I don't mean isolate from just regular people. When you isolate from believers, very bad things happen. So Christians, we are fighting a spiritual war with our minds. It's in Ephesians. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may stand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. We are at war. And so the devil likes for us to be in isolation. He likes us to be cut off from non-believers. He likes us to have the idea in our mind that, oh, those Christians, they're not doing right, and I don't want to be with those people. But this is in Galatians from Paul. Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. And be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. Share each other's burdens, and in this way, obey the law of Christ. We are called to be together, guys. I know believers who have isolated themselves, and it's not good what happens. The devil likes isolation because when you're alone, you're weaker. It says in Ecclesiastes 4:12, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. When you are all by yourself and you're not really in solitude with God, then you are alone. And if you're a believer, you're really not a match for the devil. As I said, unless you're really in solitude with God, as in God put you there. Otherwise, I'm just going to tell you some of the things that kind of happens when you're an isolated believer, because I've actually seen this in action. So what happens is you start judging other believers, like actually judging them. So you pull away, and then you start looking at them like over there. And you're like, oh, that person's lukewarm. That person, look at the mistakes of that person. Oh, I'm better than that person. Those people don't even know what they're doing. Like, do they even read their Bible? You get very, very judgy. You also become very picky and selective about the people that you choose to be around. And I don't mean this in like a godly way. I mean, you look at people from your own lens, not from Jesus's lens anymore. Now you're off in your own world, your own reality. Everything that you're doing is kind of based off yourself. And Jesus didn't ask you to do that. And so you start lacking kind of like empathy because you're not around other believers to hear about the struggles that they're going through so that you can build up, that you can share your struggles with them as well. You just become like this unit of one. And that is why it becomes so hard if you really are a believer and you are out by your own. Satan will get into your mind. And you can't say, oh, I'm just here reading the Bible by myself, because God wouldn't do that. As I just read to you God's word, he wouldn't do that. You are supposed to meet with other believers. You are supposed to fellowship. We are the church. There is the head, the arm, the body, the legs, the feet. We are the church of Christ. So he wants you to join it. Don't judge it, build it, unify, edify, encourage, get together. Don't judge, you can correct, but just become a unit again. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is even perfect in God's house. Okay? So I wanted to finish off. I know I feel like I'm already at like 50 minutes or so, but I just wanted to share my own personal story. Quickly, I wanted to mention that one of the best examples in the Bible of solitude is of Elijah. He is by himself for 3 years with God, but legitimately with God by the brook Kidron. And even he has moments where he thought he was alone, legitimately alone. And he says to God, I'm the only one. And God says to him, there are 7,000 that haven't worshiped Baal. And so that's what happens when you're alone. Kind of you start to almost feel alone. And he even had God by his side. But I mention Elijah because God had him for 3 years. Elijah wasn't in solitude for the rest of his life. He was in solitude, and then God sent him out to do a job. And so that's why I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and what's been going on with me in my life, because I am actually just coming out of solitude right now. I moved to a place that I could not have imagined. I moved here with the intention of being here for 3 months, a very rural place that there's nothing for me to do out here. I really don't have really any friends. And I moved out here to take care of my father who had Alzheimer's. And as I said, I thought it was just going to be a 3-month stint. We would have figured it out, and God kept me here for a whopping 3 years. And obviously he didn't tell me that because I wouldn't have come. And so I was here and he really, really worked on me. Was I in epic isolation, like all by myself? No. I felt very alone many times. And you want to know what happened? God pushed me to go to church, and I drove over an hour to go find people similar in age to me. And then I became very, very active in that church. I was actually shocked by how much I grew. God did so much in my life in the past 3 years by pulling me away from, family and friends and putting me in a place that I didn't want to be. So solitude doesn't always mean that you're completely ethically alone. You may be in a place that you don't want to be. Your day-to-day may be very alone. Mine is very alone. I talk to my camera. I don't really talk to many people. But to find a sense of community, I go out and I go to church and I get involved. And as I said, solitude is preparatory in nature. So I grew immensely by the grace of God. And these are 3 things that I want you to understand about solitude with God, because solitude is not permanent. And as I said, it looks different for different people, but if it is from God, number 1, it is for a purpose. 2, it has a definitive end. And 3, when it is done, you are prepared, as God wants you to be, to start a mission. And so, check your life and ask yourself, is God preparing me to do something? Or am I doing this for myself? Because if your solitude is from God, then you are going to emerge with a clear purpose, a clear mission, and fire in your heart.